The soil scientists say that if a soil is allowed to develop undisturbed, that it develops layers they call horizons. Now, first of all, undisturbed, what does that mean? Well, that means without you or me coming along with a shovel or a plow or a D9 dozer, or it means without mom coming along with a landslide or some such thing. So as long as it's allowed to develop undisturbed, they form these layers called horizons. So let's take a look at what the horizons are first. There's a little sort of diagram that shows what they are and the names of them. From top to bottom, the top one is called the O horizon. Now, O stands for organic. And what the O horizon is, I would describe it, not being a soil scientist, but I would describe it in my own experiences, that layer that consists of recognizable plant parts. For example, the best place I can think of to go to see it, just think of walking in the woods. The stuff you're walking on, that's the O horizon. It's right at the top. And what do you see there at the bottom of your feet? Well, you see leaves and sticks and stems and maybe seeds and things like that. So that would be the O horizon. Now, if you very carefully scraped away that O horizon on your next little walk through the woods, what you would see directly below it is this thing called the A horizon. Now, A stands for alluviation, and basically what it is, it's a layer of decomposed plant parts. If you sort of picked it up, it would be sort of a black, earthy feeling kind of stuff. You could probably dig through it and find some remains that kind of resemble plant parts, but most of them have been decomposed by a combination of oxidation. But I suspect it's probably mostly microbial activity that goes after that stuff, basically using it for its own food supply. And so we have this layer then of this dark material, and we call it humus. Now, if you're a gardener and you have a compost pile at home, well, that's basically an artificial humus. You're making your own humus, you see. You're doing exactly what is done out there in nature, except you're doing it in some kind of a compost pile mode. Now, if you scrape that away very, very carefully, right below that, you're going to see another layer called the E horizon. And what it is, it's sort of a light gray in color, and it's just sandy. And if you look at very closely at it, especially with a little hand lens, what you'll see is that just sand is what it is. So this is simply a little concentration of quartz. That's just about all that's in it. Everything else has been leached out of it down into the next horizon, which is the B horizon. Now, from all the stuff we've been talking about, supporting plant life and all that sort of thing, this has got to be the most important horizon of all, because the major component now of the B horizon are the clay minerals. Now remember, the clay minerals, that's where the food is stored. That's where the plant sends its roots to get something to eat. So that's the importance of the B horizon, concentration of the clay minerals. Now, there are some other things in there, of course. For example, there's always going to be a little bit of quartz in there. It's mixed in with that stuff. Another thing that's going to be in there are these iron oxides. Now, we talked about oxidizing iron into hematite, Fe2O3, using iron dissolved in water. But, you know, actually that's sort of a two-step process. The first step in the process of the oxidation of the iron is actually to oxidize it to form a compound that's iron oxyhydroxide, FeO brackets OH. Now, the name for that, the mineral name for that, is limonite. Some people call it goethite, but limonite is the common name for it. It's a bright yellow mineral, okay? So that's the first step. And then what happens if you take limonite now? Remember I told you anything that shows the hydroxyl, that's a chemist's way of saying that there's water in the lattice of this stuff. So if you take that and then expose it to drying and perhaps just to the exposed to the sun, the radiant energy of the sun, it dehydrates and ends up forming Fe2O3 and releasing the water. Now the Fe2O3 is the end product we talked about before. It's called hematite, and it's red in color. Now, the important thing of these two, and the reason why I bring them up, is because those two materials, limonite and hematite, along with organic material, which gives a black color, those are the three main coloring agents in sedimentary rocks and in soils. And think about it, if you were to mix yellow limonite, red hematite, and black organic matter together in various combinations, you can get just about any color you want. Some chestnut browns, red, you name it. So there's the big coloring agents. Now, before I leave that, I just one other comment, because some of you may live in areas like I do, where this is a very common observance. If you happen to live in an area that mines whatever, be it coal or minerals, where pyrite is involved, FeS2, wherever pyrite is involved, the pyrite oxidizes, the sulfur turns into sulfate, which is one of the most soluble of all anions, and so it's taken away. But the iron now is made present and available to the oxygen to go through that process of first making limonite and then drying that to make hematite. Case in point, if you were to come to where I live, one of the things we do is we mine coal. And one of the minerals associated with coal-associated rocks and with coal itself is pyrite. This stuff, when exposed, oxidizes, sulfate takes off. The iron is put into the streams. These are oxygen-rich waters. So right within the stream, we start generating this limonite. Well, the picture you see driving through much of Appalachia is the stream bottom is just covered with this yellow material. What that yellow material is, that's limonite. Matter of fact, they have a common name for it. They call it yellow boy, because it is yellow. Then if you take a stream like that, and then during the droughty times of the year when the water perhaps would drop and those rocks would be exposed to the atmosphere and a little bit of heat of the sun, and that limonite dehydrates, and then it turns into hematite, the red color. And so the thing you see then are streams that have these yellow bottoms, and the rocks along the side, a little bit higher, will be red. Well, that's the result of these two products being precipitated out. Well, now back to our little horizon, though. In the B horizon, you have both of these, and you probably have some organic material too, and as a result, mixing those together is what gives the soil its characteristic color, and the characteristic color of most soils is probably concentrated in the B horizon. Well, then below that is called the C horizon, and this is usually referred to just as the parent material. What it really is simply regolith, now in the process of being converted into a soil. And remember, that's where the roots go down. Remember, these roots now, they generate acids, carbonic acid. What they use it for, the hydrogen ion they use to go over and get whatever they want to eat off the clay minerals by cation exchange. But there's probably an excess of carbonic acid being generated, and that stuff, there's your carbonic, that attacks rocks and minerals. So you see, the point being, it has to be understood that the plants themselves have a big role to play in the formation of the soil itself, and I think the big role to play is in the juices that are generated along those roots. So anyway, there's your horizons, from AO at the top to C at the bottom. Now what I want to do is to go back and revisit those various kinds of soils, because I want to show you some specific things about the individual soil types. We presented the spottisol, the altisol, the mollisol, the iridisol, and the oxisol. So there's a chart now that I made up, and this basically deals with temperate climate soils and the tropical. We don't need to deal with the polar, because there really aren't soils as we've been talking about in the polar region. So we'll simply concentrate on temperate climates and on the tropical climate. The temperate, again, would be humid, the spottisol and altisol, semi-arid, mollisol, arid, iridisol, and of course over there in the tropics we have the oxisol. Now, in this chart, what I'm going to do, and what I've done, is below each of those soil types, I've drawn a hypothetical profile with the identified horizons of what each one would look like. Now, the important thing on this chart is to look to the left of each one of those little drawings, and you'll see two arrows, one pointing down, one pointing up. The one pointing down is labeled R, the one pointing up is labeled G. G and R stand for rainwater and groundwater. Now, we've already mentioned this, but I think it's well to mention it again. Big difference in composition, big difference in chemistry. For example, rainwater is acidic. It's just carbonic acid, pure and simple, a dilute solution. Important point is that the major cation involved now is the hydrogen ion. Groundwater now is totally different. The chemistry of groundwater is not acid. It's basically either neutral or alkaline. Why? Because of all those bicarbonates that have been put into it. by the weathering process heading back to the ocean. You see, this is one of the way the water gets back to the ocean is underground, you see, so the groundwater is alkaline. So those two arrows is my way of saying in each of these little drawings what the relative impact of rainwater and groundwater is. So let's take the first column, the one that has the spotosol and the ultisol. Now we're going to deal with them together because basically they're the same. There's very little difference in them, except a little bit more acidity perhaps in the spotosol. But if you look at the column, one of the things you see, first of all, O horizon. Does it have an O horizon? Yes, it does. And these will have very, very thick O horizons. Why? Remember, these are forest soils. In forests, you have lots of debris falling off trees. You got the leaves and the sticks and the stems, the stuff you rake back on your little trip through the woods. So you have a very, very well-developed O horizon. Below that, how about the A horizon? Yeah, you got a really good A horizon too, because you got lots of O horizon stuff to be decomposed by the microbes or by oxygen. So you have a good humic layer down there. So the A horizon is very well developed. How about the E horizon, that leach zone down there of just quartz? Yeah, it's pretty good size too, because you got lots of downward motion, you see. Note the arrow, the R arrow is the dominant one, so good leaching down through. Okay, now we get to the B horizon. The B horizon, remember now the important thing, it contains the clay minerals. It's got those various oxides or hydroxides of iron, so it's all colored, whatever color you want to make it. And the other thing that's in there sometimes, but not always, it may or may not contain carbonate minerals. Now, whether it does or not depends upon what the particular chemistry is. But in this chemistry, with that downward leaching, all those carbonates you see are removed. So that's the reason why this soil now is acid. You don't have any bicarbonate in there to neutralize the acidity, so you don't have any kind of a soluble or relatively insoluble carbonate within the B horizon. It's pure and simple clay minerals, a little bit of quartz, a little bit of coloring agent. And of course everybody has a C horizon. Question, is this good for agriculture? Well, we've been through this too, but I think it does well to repeat it. Yes, it is. All you have to do, of course, is neutralize that acidity. You neutralize that acidity with ag lime, you've got great agricultural soils. Why? It's just full of clay minerals, lots of place to store nutrient matter for the plants, but all you have to do is get rid of the acidity, and we do that by spreading all that agricultural lime around. Well, if you ever travel through the East in the springtime, that's a big business in the East, selling agricultural lime. So anyway, agriculturally, very, very, very good, once it's been treated. Now let's move over one, the mollisol. Note in the mollisol diagram, the two arrows are about equal in dimension. In other words, that's my way of saying that throughout any period of time, let's say a year, there's just as much rainwater moving down as there is groundwater moving up. Now, when does the rainwater move down and the groundwater move up? Obviously, during the rainy season, then you have the rainwater moving down. During the dry season, the groundwater is moving up. So that's the implication of those two arrows being of equal dimension. Now, let's look at the diagram. Let's look at the horizons. Is there an O horizon? Yeah, sure, there's an O horizon. But note, it's not going to be nearly as thick as in the spotosol or the ultisol. Why? We're talking 10 to 20 inches of precipitation a year here. We don't have trees. You don't have lots of trees under those conditions. So you don't have all those leaves falling to the ground and all those sticks and stems. So you don't have the accumulation of plant debris you had before, but you do have probably the accumulation of grasses, because that's what's going to dominate in this scenario. So the O horizon is relatively thin, but it's there. How about the A horizon? Well, you got an O horizon, so you're going to have an A horizon, but it's not going to be as thick as it was before, again, because you don't have the source material to work with. E horizon, that leach zone, well, yeah, you're going to have it all right, but because there's not as much downward motion of the water, it's going to be a little thinner than it was over there in the ultisol or the spotosol. But now the important part is that B horizon. Again, the main component in this B horizon now is going to be the clay minerals. But here's the difference. The difference is in those relative arrows, rainwater and groundwater. What this says is basically they have sort of an equal influence on the development of this particular soil. For example, let's say during the downward phase of the rainwater, hydrogen ions, we would suspect maybe they go over there and kick off whatever happens beyond the clay minerals and go in instead. Let's say it did. So it's been hydrogenated. But then through the other half of the year, what you've got is groundwater moving up through. Don't have much hydrogen ion in there. You have lots of alkaline materials, calcium and magnesium and things like that. And what happens is they go over, especially the calcium in this case, and it kicks off whatever happens to be there and goes on in its stead. So note, that's almost like just artificial neutralization with ag lime. In other words, you don't have to do it because Mom Nature did it on her own. Well, what happens then when the rain comes back? Won't the hydrogen ions kick off the calcium ions? Well, I mentioned this before. No, they won't, because it's a question of charge. Hydrogen charge 1, calcium ion charge 2, 1s don't kick 2s off. So note what we're saying here, that in the mollisol, it is self-neutralizing. All the stuff we have to pay big bucks here in the East to do, Mom Nature does for free in the Midwest, because in this mollisol scenario, it's automatically self-neutralized. Question: what about agricultural capacity? Fantastic. Question: what do you think would grow really well in these conditions? The answer: high calcium? Grass. Grass. Now let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back in time to, let's say, the Mesozoic era. We're back now maybe 150 million years. 150 million years or thereabouts. Grass evolved. Now, I don't know if you really have a feeling for the real significance of grass. The thing that grass does that no other plant does, what it does, you can crop grass right down to the roots, and it will grow right back again. You can crop it back down again, it'll grow right back again. That's why you've got to go out and cut your lawn every 2 weeks, because it keeps coming back. Regardless of how close you crop it to the roots, it'll still come back. Why was that a part of evolution? Well, you see, up until now, there were no grazing animals, because you see, grazing animals basically crop plants down to the roots. If you crop any other plant down to the roots, they would die. So before the grazing animals could even evolve, we had to evolve grasses. Once the grasses evolved, then the grazing animals could evolve. So these grasses we're talking about go way, way, way back in time. So back before we ever showed up on the scene on this continent, here you had the great grassland of North America. Most continents have a great grassland. Ours, for example, extends from northern Oklahoma all the way up into Canada. But you got the Ukraine, you got the Pampas of South America, you got the Veldt of Africa. Every continent has a grassland like this. Well, what do we use it for now? Well, what happened, let's see, when would this have started? I try to remember my history. Was it in the mid-1800s when the federal government was encouraging farmers to go out into the great grasslands and convert it into agriculture? I think it was the Great Land Rush. Why did they do that? Well, I think the reason why they did that is because the population of the United States was growing pretty fast, and they needed more food to feed more people. So they were encouraging converting this area into agricultural area. Well, what did they do? Well, they went out and plowed up the land and plowed up the natural grasses, and then we planted our own kind of grasses, like wheat, rye, oats, barley. They're just grasses, you see. In other words, we are planting now the kind of grains that are ground up to make flour, to make bread. These are the grasslands. The modern grasslands are the food basket for the world. Matter of fact, there's a term, they usually refer to these, the mollisols, as the bread basket of the world. And that's the reason why. Because they grow the grain to make the flour, to make the bread that feeds the people. Most of the people of the world aren't as lucky as we are, having this variety of food to eat. Most of the people of the world live on grain. Well, most of the people in the world live on rice, which doesn't grow here. But other than that, live on grain. So they call these things the breadbasket soils of the world. They can grow anything else too. Corn, of course, you've been out there. Corn's high, okay? In Iowa, same thing. It's just because it's a great agricultural soil. Now, one other comment. Well, there's a word. It's a Russian word. It's called chernozem. The Russian word chernozem means black soil. That's another term that's been used forever to describe these mollisols. Why? They're black. Now, the best way to see it, if you ever had a chance, and the next time you do fly cross country, try to fly in the springtime when they're plowing. And you look down from the aircraft at those areas, and it just looks like somebody took a black paintbrush and just painted the ground black. Why? These grasses we're talking about, the entire plant dies and comes back every year from seed. Well, the idea is not only that the plant at the surface die, but all the roots do, all the way down through the soil profile. Well, as they die and decay, that's the black color we've been talking about. So it's the decay of the roots that imparts the black color to the entire soil profile, and that's where the Russians got this term of Chernozem. All right, let's move over one again. We're over to the iridosol now. Now, the big difference in the iridosol, it isn't like we've been talking about. We've been talking about horizons, for example. There are no horizons in the iridosols. These are, remember, this was a real problem for the soils people before they came up with that wonderful name, iridosol. You don't have, what you're talking about here is just regolith, pure and simple. But here's the important part about these areas. Think about it now. If you look at the diagram, great big up arrow, very small down arrow. Groundwater by far dominates. Groundwater is being drawn to the surface by capillary action. Why? The air above is very, very dry. Now, as this water moves up through, bearing all these bicarbonates in solution, the water evaporates just below the surface. They precipitate out as carbonates of all kinds, sodium, calcium, magnesium, and all those, and they form a very alkaline scenario now. Matter of fact, the concentration of these minerals can get so dense, they actually form a layer. It's almost like concrete. They call it caliche, or some people call it hard pan. But anyway, these now are very, very highly alkaline, super alkaline. Even if you could try to grow something there, I mean, could the kind of plants that we think about growing in our gardens grow there? Never. I mean, this is so toxic to them, they would never be able to grow. How about the plants that do grow there? We're talking cactus. There are not very many of them. There's one over there and one over there. But how do they do that? How do those plants survive in that super alkaline environment? Well, again, I'm not much of a botanist, but I think the answer is those plants have a very special adaptation on their roots. They have literally valves, if you will, that control the amount of anything that passes into the root. Once they get the amount of nutrients they want from those soluble materials, then they close the valves, so they limit how much is taken in. So they can survive. But the kind of plants we want to grow, let's say for agriculture, never, never. However, how many times have you seen or read about deserts being turned into oases? Well, you hear about that a lot. I remember the very first trip I ever took to the Southwest. We were on a field trip to the Mojave Desert in Southern California. We came over this rise and looked down the valley, and it's green. I said, what's this? What's the green down there? And we got down. It was a truck farm. It was a truck farm. We're in a desert now. How could they possibly do that? Well, I think, first of all, most of these areas, there had to be a particular scenario. Probably this place we're talking about that they converted over at some time in the past was a different climate. Let's say sometime in the geologic past, perhaps not too long ago, it was semi-arid. So maybe at that time it developed a mollisol. Picture now right next door to you in your little diagram, the mollisol. This was what kind of soil it was. It had the clay minerals. You could grow anything in it, of course. And then what happened? The climate changed. This place became arid. What happened then? All the plants died. But note that structure, that soil structure is still there. The clay minerals are still there. The problem is they're loaded with these highly alkaline salts. That's the problem. Well, the thing is they're water soluble. So if we could somehow flush those out, redissolve them, take them away, we'd be back to that mollisol scenario. Well, the problem is, where are we going to get the water? That little down area, you see, there's not much rainfall. Well, let's increase the rainfall. Well, you know, they've tried that kind of stuff, salting clouds and all that kind of stuff. It really didn't work very well. But what is the way they increase rainfall? Remember, we were just talking about the downward arrow. The easiest way to do it, it's what's called irrigation. That's all irrigation is. It's artificial rain. Just think about when you water your yard or your garden. You water it because it hasn't rained for a while. You need some more rain, so you make your own rain. You take the hose out there. So that's all irrigation is. So note, if you increase that down arrow and then decrease the up arrow, you're over to the mollisol scenario again. You leach out all those minerals. Now you can plant anything you want. But there's a double-edged sword to that, I might point out. You've really got to be careful about this kind of stuff. The salts that remove from that particular place, where do you think they're going to end up? They very well may end up in a stream close by. And every time you do that, more salts get into that stream, and all of a sudden streams in the Southwest become saltier and saltier to the point where they can't really be used for anything anymore. So you have to be very careful about what you're doing when you start messing with Mom Nature. You got to know what you're doing, and unfortunately oftentimes we don't. So anyway, that would be the so-called aridisol. Now, the last one I want to talk about is this oxisol. The old laterites. This would be the tropical climate soil. Oxisol, all it is a mixture of 3 oxides, aluminum, iron, and silicon. That's all it is. Question, where are the clay minerals? There are none. Why not? The intensity of the weathering in the tropical climate, because of the extreme temperature and the extreme precipitation, even the clay minerals decompose. That's where the aluminum and the silicon came from. You see, so you don't have the clay minerals. Well, how about the plants? Where do they get their food? Well, if you look at the plants that grow in the tropics, they don't send roots down looking for food because they know there's none down there. What they do is they send their roots right out in the floor of the forest. The stuff falls out of the forest heading to the forest floor. It's probably decomposing on the way down, but the decomposition rate is so fast because of the high temperatures, the lots of water, and all those microbial activity. The microbes take what they want, and then what's left over, the plants take it right up into themselves directly from that surface. In other words, the living plants are living on the remains of the dead. And so it's a totally different scenario in the tropics. That's how most tropical plants get their food. Some of them, they call them air breathers. I'm not exactly sure why they call them that. Up in the canopy, there'll be plants that are just hold-fast kind of plants. And they'll have these big leaves that fill with water that collect dust. Well, we got a bowl here full of carbonic acid. And so it dissolves some of the dust and provides the nutrients they want right through the leaves. There are, of course, parasites. But the whole point is the kinds of plants that grow in the tropics are designed to grow in the tropics. They're designed to grow in a soil totally different from anything that we have in the temperate climate. But here's the problem. There are places in the world, like Brazil, for example. I hate to put my finger on any particular country, but there are places like Brazil who are trying to promote farmers to go into the tropical rainforest, chop it down, and convert it into agricultural land. Why? Again, because they need the food to feed a growing population. So here's what they do. They go in, they chop down perhaps a couple of 100 acres of the forest, they pile all this stuff up, and they burn it. So now picture this now. You got a big pile of ash. All the nutrients that were in those plants are now concentrated in this ash. Then what you do, you plow that ash in, so now you've got a 200-acre plot where the upper foot, maybe 2 feet, is just full of all kinds of nutrients, and then they go plant anything they want. And the first year, the production is really, really good. Why? There was plenty of food for the plants to live on. And they did very, very well. And the reap is very, very good. But the second year, it isn't so good. And by the third year, there isn't any. Why? Well, a couple of things. One of the things, let's say, now again, I'm not a farmer, but let's say we talk about corn. And I think this is probably safe to say. Most of the nutrients that a plant takes out of the ground goes into whatever the reproduction body is. Because, see, the object of the game now is to reproduce yourself. Remember, that's one of the driving forces. So, for example, in corn, most of the nutrients that come out of the ground are in those kernels, which are in the corn cob. That's what you harvest. But that's what you send away for someone else to eat somewhere else. So you see, you're harvesting nutrients and sending them out of the area. Besides that, it's still raining every day. It's still carbonic acid coming down, dissolving out what nutrients were there. So between harvesting the nutrients and dissolving them out, pretty soon by the third year, there's not enough left to do anything. So then what do? They just move over and chop down another 200 acres. And see, that's the problem. The problem is these soils were never meant to grow the kind of things they're trying to grow, and they will not do it. So chopping down rainforests is not the answer to their problem. There are a lot of people who are very concerned about that. Chopping down rainforests, here's one of the problems right off the bat. Global warming, increase of carbon dioxide, we can argue all of that, I guess, but the point is, carbon dioxide, one of the things that takes it out of the atmosphere are green plants. The two things that put it in, decay of once living tissue and volcanic eruptions. But you see, you have to have a balance up there to keep the concentration of carbon dioxide uniform. Well, if you chop down green plants, all of a sudden there's carbon dioxide that would have been taken out that isn't. Now, I understand most of the carbon dioxide taken out is the green plants and plankton. I understand that. But still, the rainforests are doing something. But if you chop them down, you're upsetting that balance that we need to keep that temperature of the atmosphere constant. So the whole point is, whenever you start looking at Mom Nature, the way she does it, there was a reason for it. And there are certain things you can't change, and one of the things you're not going to be able to change, you're not going to be able to grow the kind of crops we need for high protein or whatever it is they grow in tropical scenarios because the soil isn't designed for it. And with that soapbox, I think we'll close and go to the next topic.